Okay, I'm just starting up the session now. Okay, no one's joined yet. It's 12:01. I'll give a few more minutes while I wait for some students to join. Hey, thanks for joining. Just going to give a few more minutes to see if we have anyone else. This week I'm going to work a little bit on a demo that has to do with the week 7 assignment, a little bit with the affordance and denial and risk and reward concepts. Specifically the, excuse me, the idea of a maze. Because a lot of people tend to, they tend to create a literal maze. And by that, I mean like the traditional, well, the Western kind of, what do you call it? The Western kind of myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. If you guys know that one. So what, Greek myth, I think? Yeah, it's the words, one thing I brought up in some people's reviews, there's some of the concepts that are mentioned in the lectures and also in the in some of the assignment descriptions. They bring up the idea of a maze, and I think even next week, perhaps the assignment, the idea of a labyrinth comes up, and those terms are often used interchangeably. I'm going to show you the pictures I'm looking at right here with Theseus and the Minotaur. If you're not familiar with the myth, I don't remember all the details of the myth, but Theseus was a Greek hero, and at some point in the myth, he has to confront this creature, the Minotaur, in a labyrinth or a maze, depending on how you're telling the story. But you'll see a lot of it, in a lot of these pieces of art. They show like a very graphic, not realistic, but a graphic depiction of a maze. Like here, like there, the border of this is made to look like a maze. I'm trying to think, there's some other ones down here somewhere I saw. That's like actually in the maze. Right there. And then even farther, there's like this very stylized depiction of the maze. Right there, or again, the labyrinth. And here's a kind of a very abstract depiction of the maze and the Minotaur and Theseus. So yeah, there's a lot of different depictions of that. But You can see the maze images here in this here. The thing about mazes is they're much more interesting for the designer of a maze, or when they're presented kind of conceptually from a top-down view like this. If you're actually in them in a 3D space, if you're in an actual maze, they become very disorienting, and that's kind of the point. Famously in the movie The Shining, in the end of the movie, spoiler alert, there's just a chase through a maze made of hedges. And it's meant to be like it's a horror movie, so it's meant to be very disorienting, very upsetting. But when it's in a game in a 3D space, like a literal maze can become disorienting in a bad way, unless you're trying to create moments of confusing the player, like high drama, high psychologically intense moments of that. That it might work that way in certain circumstances, very specific circumstances. But if it's for exploration's sake, what happens is you end up with well, if we talk about affordance and denial like we did this week, you end up with a lot of denial, I should say, because you're placing the player in an area where you're denying them visual knowledge of where they're going. You're denying them very little foresight into where they're headed, very little foreknowledge. So you end up with so much denial that it's very demotivating for the player. So in the assignment description, I'm going to look back at that. I mean, I didn't write the assignment descriptions, but in the week 7 assignment, it said create a nonlinear maze-like space. It said maze-like for a reason. It didn't mean a literal maze, and it really meant maze in terms of just a nonlinear space. Like the same goes for a maze. There's many ways. You're given a lot of freedom of movement to find your way through. And in the week 7 assignment, we wanted to have you find the ultimate treasure box here. So I'm going to show you what I mean. I think I'm going to try to show you ways that you could use a maze, but the ways you could balance the feelings of affordance and denial. Like you could deny the player at times knowledge of where they're going, and then at times you could afford them more of kind of a macro sense of knowledge of where they might go. So let's see, if I just start with I'll start with my basic cube here. Turn on my grid. Okay, so I'll start here and we'll see how we can make this work. Now let's make this, I don't know. Oops, it's my position, sorry about that. 4. Okay, there we go. And let's do 8, that seems good. Just make my floor here. And we'll just start duplicating this in like, maybe being a little fussy here, maybe I'll go to 6. That feels a little more like what I want. So I'm just going to start duplicating this out. Just to set up our path. One of the other things that's really that can be really demotivating about a maze is if there's too many dead ends. they quickly become, especially the longer the player has to go to find a dead end, the more demotivating it is. Try not to spend too long on this. But I'm building this because I'm going to try to balance the denial of knowledge of where the player goes with moments where we elevate the player, we use some elevation, and we show them more of the level. Moments where we maybe could do that. Okay, it's starting to get a little more like what I want. And let's just make it, I don't know, what's a good maze height? Okay, we'll go with that. While I'm doing this, I'm going to, I don't know, I may address, there were some questions posted or a question posted in the forums for the Q&A. Yeah, it was, Ryan had asked, while gameplay always comes first, I've come to find that presentation always matters. Even when presenting to peers, leads, or anyone internally, better looking blockouts can lead to more focused feedback. This could likely be a weak assignment on its own, but what ways have you found make for better presentations? So yeah, this is something that came up a little bit in previous assignments. Amelia had mentioned, in which assignment was it? Once I forget, I'm sorry, I can't remember which assignment it was now, but in one of them she mentioned using as much or as little detail as you needed to convey your ideas. And I think that's a pretty important, that's sort of the idea that's at the crux of that question. Oftentimes it can kind of serve you two benefits when you decide how much detail to put into your blockouts. And it might depend on the project too. If it's heavily art directed and they kind of have a lot of sway over, say the art department has a lot of sway over what the environment will be, then maybe you do have to stay more abstract and stay more with simple blocks. Other times, um, if you're able to build out parts of your level and theme the block out the way you want, like an Old West town or something medieval or ruins or science fiction, if you're able to, or industrial, I guess, if you're able to theme those in ways that that you want, it might also help you be inspired by coming up with solutions to problems, to justifying things in your block out, to be themed according to the to be created according to the theme. Like, um, say you want pieces of cover to be, you know, like cars or machinery or, God forbid, crates, which always never gets old apparently. Um, but it might give you like creative solutions. One idea might sort of beget another idea as you work on your level. I find that's usually true for me. Um, I worked on a level recently where there was an interior space. It was like a secret chamber built, carved out of the caverns of a place, and it was actually built to look like Gothic architecture that was carved out of like um, out of cave minerals and cave rocks. And but it was I kind of based the layout on the Paris Opera House. Um, I forget the name of the opera house, but I knew it back when I built it. Um, but what it did is it sort of gave me ideas. Like the player was, if I wanted the player to be able to use a grapple gun to grapple around the space, I created like, I thought, well, what would there be in a place like an opera house or a place that looked like kind of an opera house with that kind of opulence? What could there be in there that you could maybe grapple onto? And so I thought, well, okay, how about like just really massive, overly grandiose chandeliers? Like, how would that work? So I started, I started doing a block out of like a very large, like ballroom size chandelier, like really large. And I built it to player metrics, so the player could actually, when they like grappled on top of it, they could stand on it. They could perch on the arms of the chandelier. It was that big, but it was inspired. My point is, it was inspired by the theming that I was doing of the blockout I was doing. Um, Another way recently was like some of you guys, when you were working on some of these assignments here that were based on the old Desperados game, there was definitely uh, the theming of like of old mining operations, and so that meant there were mine carts and there were um, old mine tracks, and a lot of you used the mine tracks, or maybe not in this class, I can't remember exactly, but even in previous semesters of this class, students use the mine tracks themselves as paths through the level, as elevated paths sometimes up on raised platforms, like uh, like kind of elevated tracks, elevated bridges, that kind of thing, so the player could get a high vantage point. But they were able to justify them because that upper vantage point was not just a random, very abstract place to crawl up to and look down upon, but it inspired some of the students of doing that work. It inspired them to create things that made a hierarchical sense of a mining operation. Like, where would there be elevated tracks? So they built them and they made them seem like they were part of the environment, like they were part of the original purpose of the space. But they were also great for gameplay because it gave the player a high vantage point, gave them a sense of seeing more of learning more about the environment, making a mental map by being able to see a lot of the level at once. So things like that can be useful, and I feel like that's those two factors, as far as when to create, like you said, a beautiful block out. Those two factors should be thought about. Also, another thing that can be useful is sometimes it kind of depends. Sometimes you might find on the studio you work in, kind of like you mentioned, like you can get more focused feedback from better looking blockouts. It is true, like there's a certain baseline level of detail and focus that should be in the block out. And if you don't, if you don't hit that basic sort of baseline, you can get people distracted by things like, oh, I don't know, like paths that aren't exactly built to the right scale. Maybe they're a little hard to navigate because they're a little too small, or they're too big, so they don't provide um, a sense of urgency, or they don't provide a sense of forward momentum because they feel like you're walking too far. Um, those things can be true. Um, but yeah, I think like people, the thing that people don't realize, and I feel like this is true in the last like over the last several decades. I'm going to have a mini rant here about this, but art has been devalued in society, generally speaking, in my opinion, for decades, like year after year. It kind of started, I'm trying to think how to put this. Like if you look back at, I came from an illustration background. If you look back on illustrators in the early part of the 20th century, I mean, they were almost celebrities. They were like really big deals. They created magazine covers that when people saw them, they were really impressed. They helped sell the magazines. They were people knew these illustrators by name many times. Illustrators like Maxfield Parrish or Norman Rockwell became probably the most famous illustrator in the United States, doing covers for like the Saturday Evening Post, things like that. So anyway, they help sell things. Architecture prior to the 1940s was much more beautiful, in my opinion. Like the last beautiful period of architecture was probably Art Deco. I feel like that's why it makes an appearance a lot of times in video games, dating back to like BioShock and other games, because it's very memorable. It helps people become engaged with the spaces they're in. Um, and when there's a lack of it, people don't really give much importance mentally to the spaces they're in. For instance, banks and transit terminals used to be built like temples to their purpose, things like that. But they help people care about those spaces. And now if you look at now, like what do we have in terms of architecture? Well, we have, I don't know if you're aware of drop tile ceilings. Um, but we went from department stores having stamped tin ceilings to having drop tile ceilings. This is a mini rant, so bear with me on this here. I'm going to look up, show you the difference here. So ceilings used to look kind of like this in department stores. People have revived it a little bit in recent years, but stamped tin ceilings, let me do department store. That's too specific, I guess. So yeah, anyway, ceilings used to look kind of like this. And sorry, now they look like this. This started happening, I don't know, in the 60s maybe. And now this is your ceiling. I mean, it's pretty boring. It's like the standard ceiling in any office environment. If you work in an office, there's very likely that kind of a ceiling in it, or there's exposed pipes. And in the past, that would have been a complete horror show to people if they did that. They used stamped tin ceilings. If there were pipes or ducts, they were hidden out of view. Everything was beautified. And now we have basically everything's built for convenience. There's very little attention to detail. And the reason I bring this up is just that I feel like it's led to people having a very uninterested attitude about where they spend their time in spaces. And I feel like this translates to games as well, though. If I come back around here to at the end of my rant, if things aren't built even at the blockout phase with a certain amount of attention to detail, I'm not saying stamped tin ceiling detail, but a certain attention to detail, you're right. People don't become as mentally engaged in it, and it's a very subtle, um, almost unconscious thing they do. And I found this when I was working in illustrations, and I did, you had to do thumbnail sketches to convey just basic compositions of an illustration you were going to create. And when you did this, when you showed these thumbnail sketches, these concepts, like say a client came to you with an illustration need they wanted, and they you devised like a series of concept sketches of how you could illustrate what they were wanting. And interestingly enough, like if you didn't include enough detail, they wouldn't feel confident in the idea you were presenting, even though it was a nice composition. And you could say like, over here is, I don't know, the pool you're trying to sell or something like that, and over here are the people who are sitting by the pool. And you have like, say you just kind of sketched it in really roughly in shapes. Sometimes they'd be looking at it and they'd be thinking, they wouldn't really be as interested in that particular sketch. And then maybe you had a separate concept sketch where you did add a little extra detail, a little extra flourish, and suddenly they'd be swayed by that. And it's kind of, it's just kind of a known thing, but sometimes artists will, if they present multiple sketches of something to a client, they might have one they like the best, and they might be so confident in it that they decide they want to they want the client to go with the same sketch that the artist likes, right? So sometimes what they'll do is they'll put a little extra detail or beautification on that one sketch. And not always, but often it'll sway the client. Sometimes it'll sway the client to use that sketch because it's you know, it's sold a little better. Like you might even do one sketch of an idea you have that's more of a direct interpretation of something that someone asked you for. And then you might do another version, which is your take on it, a different version. And then with that one, you you know, you decide to add the extra little bit of flourish, and suddenly, before you know it, you've influenced people to kind of go more along the lines of what you preferred, what you thought was better. Not saying you're always going to be right, but you have to at least believe you're right when you're doing it, because that's how you'll be that's how you'll create better work, if you're more confident in what you do. And if you present that confidence by adding a little extra flourish, I believe other people will feel more confident too. So those are my thoughts on that. Not a definitive answer, but I hope it gives you some food for thought. Another thing about that idea of the devaluation of art, this was actually present. I don't know if you guys know this, but if you look at the styles of the art that were present in the original, well, I should say, if you, depends on when you were born, but when you look at the Star Wars films, you look at episodes 4 through 6, the ones that were made first, like A New Hope through Return of the Jedi. You look at that world, and it's really kind of rough. Things are kind of very worn, very beat up. The world is very beat up. The architecture of the empire is very industrial. But then, by the time they go and you go and you watch episodes 1 through 3, you find that things look very gorgeous in that movie. Like everything looks just really gorgeous. The ship designs are like sleek poured silver liquid. Like it gets really pretty. And the reason they did that was when George Lucas was art directing those, doing his creative direction on those movies, he was likening it to a lot of things that had happened in the 20th century. Like in the earlier part of the 20th century, things were more, they were more beautified. There was more of kind of a joie de vivre in the creation of things. And then by the time the empire came in, it became very, that didn't matter anymore. The world was kind of a rougher place. And I feel like or from what he said, that was kind of the reason when he went back and made the films before Star Wars. They didn't look like the Star Wars anyone knew. They looked prettier because it was a different time. And that was actually, I thought, a really astute kind of sociological observation. Ryan said, I found designers often do the opposite, boot on the head. You present your idea, but you do something obviously bad, say putting a boot on an NPC's head. Then feedback comes back, take out that boot. Then once you remove the bad element, everyone loves the result. Yeah, that's actually, no, that's actually completely what I'm talking about. It's the same thing about influencing people. Like when I said I'd make the idea I like. Well, yeah, it's actually true. Like say for instance, you're doing one idea, and then you make something ugly in it. Yeah, it's sort of like the same idea is at play. You're trying to influence people by presenting something obviously bad, and then you make it better. And then if you present it exactly the way you want, they'd find something else to pick on and maybe rip it apart, even though it was exactly as you wanted it presented. Uh, yeah, it's a weird thing. It kind of depends on which studio you work at and which people you work at. You get to know their process. You get to know your leads. You get to know the people who are in charge of a lot of creative decisions, and then and then eventually you figure out how you have to approach that kind of nudging that you need to do. I'm trying to think how I can make this work. Let's do. Trying to figure out where to place this upper part here. Let's see, what's the rotation here? Sure. I don't know if I should turn my snapping off for this. Maybe, yes, probably. I'm gonna fake a ramp here. I think I'll have to actually tilt that down a little more to make it do what I want, which is roughly that. Oops, my snapping back on. Okay. And let's see, make this we could even do something different here. We could, I'm gonna do some affordance and denial kind of stuff. In other words, I'm gonna just make this like this is a big pit. fact, maybe I can. Sure, why not? Well, did I just, oh. Thought I lost some geo, but I didn't. So yeah, say you did want to do a maze. And let's make this, I don't know. So let's see if I can, actually, let's not do that yet. I won't have time to build an entire maze here, obviously, but let's see if I just, let's see if I can, how does this rotate? Will this let me rotate or no? Okay, well, good. The exact angle I want. Oops. Oh, no, I didn't see that. Okay. Thought I was duplicating it. I was not. My bad. All right. Try this again. It's kind of good. Okay, so the point of all this, I'm just going to play this really quick, run around a little bit this way. So, all right, well, first off, this looks taller in game than I thought. How interesting is that? It's not a bad thing, but maybe I'll make this a small, how do I make this smaller? Like that. This is very much like a Mario type deal here, isn't it? With the coins. Right. So I can see the first coin there, and we have an obvious, like an obvious denial. I can't reach the coin, but we're afforded possible paths on either side. Oh, I slide down that. And then when we get up here, we not only get the coin, but we could make it, Actually, I should make the coin where I can actually grab it. But once we get the coin, we can also see more of the level beyond it. This could be useful. Let me just add a little more maze, and I'll just do it by duplicating some of the maze we already have, I think. Yeah, in fact, I think I'll add 2 of these on here. I'll just pretend I can grab that. I don't have to run through it like an arcade game. Mm-hmm. Oops. Okay, that was. That's all right, I guess. It's not perfect, but it's just a demo. So. In fact, maybe here we make this our clear vantage point. Another thing that's important in this kind of affordance and denial presentation to the player is we think back, I brought this up on some of the previous assignments, but the idea of that we worked on a few weeks ago, which was presenting the player, creating a composition, an image composition from a static point of view. That can be useful in for lots of reasons, especially here. If you think about the idea of the node network, which we talked about earlier, let me go back to my Pinterest page. Yeah, is it here? No, I think it was there. Yeah, this idea of the node network. Right. So this idea of whenever the player enters a new node, we present to them all the information we find relevant and important. And in this case of affordance versus denial, that could be exactly the moment when you do that, when you present things in exactly the same way exactly in the direct way that you want. In other words, the start of this level that I'm building, I frame like with no confusion. For instance, I frame this this possible goal up there right ahead of me, but I deny you it right away. But then you can see very easily the paths off to the side. And then the same goes for here. Like I'm going to build this. I'm going to use this as a sort of an element here to draw the player in, to give them a space to linger, by creating a place where there's some incentive to go in here also with the coins. And then from here, I'm also going to afford them additional space or additional information about the space in the level. So from here, they'll be able to see much more of the maze beyond. So let's see if I can just grab a big chunk of this here. Okay. That's not snapping. Hold on a sec. So Robin had asked, do you have resources you recommend to learn about storytelling, especially related to level design? I have heard the books Save the Cat and the Game Narrative Toolbox are great. I haven't read either of those. I guess, yeah, you're talking about, that's a good question, storytelling and level design. I'm trying to think if I have any. I mean, for me, honestly, my biggest source of information about how to um, learn about storytelling and level design is probably just I play a lot of games. That's probably my biggest way. Like think of the levels you like the most that do you think told a good job of telling a story. Um, I think like on this I'm sorry, I don't really have resources to recommend because uh, most of my background for resources comes from it doesn't come directly from resources built for or resources supplied to help create games. Um, they tend to be more from the art space for me. So a lot of times that comes back around to the environmental narrative. Um, and so a lot of times when we talked about before about how you might include or you might decide how to much detail to include or not include in your levels, um, I would say that for me, that's usually where the storytelling begins. As a designer, I try to just add in the basics of that. And it also depends on the kind of game you're working on about how much story you have to tell. The game I'm working on now has sections where there is a really deep story to tell, and it has sections where there's absolutely no story to tell. It's almost like sort of grinding gameplay. And when I was working at Irrational on Bioshock Infinite, there really, as a level designer, we did have opportunities to tell stories, but not too many really. Most of the time, the stories came right from the creative director, and they went right kind of they went mostly, or to a great extent, they went to the level artist, the environment artist, who then built that story out in the spaces. And yeah, that's kind of how it went from there, really. Most of what I worked on. So one thing we could do here might be kind of interesting. Let me create a new game object. We could use a series of these towers as kind of nodes in the maze. Again, this is if you really had to create a maze. And if there was a maze like this, it would obviously, it wouldn't be, if it was a literal maze like this would be in probably some kind of a fantasy game. I guess it could also be an industrial environment. This could be themed with a lot of pipes and machinery that you wander through. There's a number of levels kind of like that that have a slightly maze-like feel to them. In the new Resident Evil game, the new Resident Evil 2 remake. I don't know if you guys have played that one. They do it with some of the boss fights against Birkin or whatever the scientist was. And yeah, and they did things like they had like these small, they weren't very big, but they were this small like maze-like series of corridors created by pipes and machinery and scaffolding. And they were designed to be a little bit disorienting as you fought the monster, even though after a short time you kind of mentally mapped it. But that's why I feel like that's why many times in video games you find industrial environments, because they provide a great deal of level design freedom. You can kind of justify whatever you want with abstract machinery and pipes and stuff like that. I mean, personally, I'm always a little bit let down when it's industrial environment. For me, it's sort of like less interesting. It doesn't really say much. It's very generic. But sometimes gameplay takes a back seat to that, and they're forced to just accept accept that really. Oops, I'm gonna actually try that again. Maybe that'll snap this time. I'm just trying to create I'll call it just a tower. Oops. I'll have to check out Save the Cat. I've heard of Game Narrative Toolbox, but not Save the Cat. That's interesting. These days, like storytelling wise, I mean, Naughty Dog has the best AAA, some of the best AAA stories that I've played. Um, although God of War from Sony Santa Monica was really good. But outside of the AAA space, I'm actually finding most of the compelling stories like in the indie game space. I don't know if you guys played the What Remains of Edith Finch game, but if you haven't, like that and Firewatch to me were some of the best stories in games in the past several years. So one thing this could do, like conceivably, I'm not going to say that I'm going to achieve it in the course of this demo, but one idea we have that might work here could be when the player reaches these towers, they could see, actually that's not that easy to see based on where I place this, but let me move it over. This is what's kind of nice about ProGrid. When you're building on the grid, you can pretty easily see like kind of how things line up. But yeah, from here, this could become kind of interesting because you start to see like where this tower is in the distance. We could even do something like, could even raise it up. Oops. Yeah, maybe the next tower is all the way up at that height, for instance. So from here we see another tower, and then we suddenly realize that we have to keep finding the towers, and then You know, same thing here. Like again, we're trying to frame this from this view. Maybe the next one isn't high. Maybe the next one is back down at this level. But maybe it's now off to the side more. We can kind of get start again, working really simply, getting our sense of macro scale in the level. You know, we can now kind of see like, okay, I can see based on the size, like this is maybe my next goal, that's my other goal. You know, and then maybe finally, way down the line, or maybe you don't want to show like the ultimate goal in the end. Maybe what this is going to show me here, maybe it's going to show me the final tower, which is actually occluded from my view at the start. Maybe eventually when I get up to this tower here, you know, I see my ultimate goal there in the distance. So then we could build this constant sense of denying the player knowledge by sending them down into the maze, and then maybe we surprise them with things that are down in the maze. Maybe that maybe from here they could see things like they could see certain parts of the maze are more dangerous. Maybe there's some platforming challenges, and then other ones, maybe there are there's treasure they could see from a distance. Maybe they see more coins in the maze, that kind of thing. Let's see. If we do, what's that, 31? Okay. And this would probably be rotated 90, I think. So from here, maybe here's where we start to see this progression, and that becomes kind of interesting to us. Again, setting these up at the early stages so I can see the progression I want. Like here, I can still see these two things, but maybe, you know, I don't want you to see that yet, right? So what do? Well, we could, until we know what that is, we could just make this a really large occluder. By really large, I mean really large. Sure, there we go. And maybe this should be a little closer for the frame. I'll just resize this a little. Let's see. Yeah, so maybe, again, we use this large structure here to like frame the view from here. And then by the time we get here, it's also kind of framing the view a little bit of this. And then if this is really important, let's see. I don't know, maybe we make it bigger in the distance. If we wanted to be like maybe the ultimate treasure's there, so we make it bigger and more obvious. That could work too. Let's delete some of this. Not sure how this is going to go. Go back to local here. I'm going to turn off my snapping again. Actually, I can just, I don't need to make that being too fussy. What can we do? I'm going to start at the top to help align this thing a little better. And I'll turn my snapping back on so it's like that. Now I'll try to, actually let me grab this. Maybe I can wrap this around the base to make that more interesting. Or, you know, created a multi-level kind of staircase here. I don't know if that was necessary. Probably not. This could be, okay. Maybe we make this so it's kind of obviously, when you round that corner, you can see the entrance going up. It's killing me that I can't use, well, I haven't taken the time to figure out how to do it, but I'm still using WASD for my movement in Unity, but the thing is I never do that in every other program. I use the arrow keys because I mouse left. It's an old habit dating back to some very old gameplay habits. But it's still, when I have to do WASD, I end up like mashing Q and R. It drives me crazy. But I know like Unity seems to be, I'm not a Unity expert. I don't know if you picked up on that, but I'm really not. I only use it for this course. Like in my game career, I've used a lot of Unreal and some other engines too, but Unreal's been the biggest. And I tend to be like kind of have their workflow and their tools stuck in my head when I go into this. So let's see, what do we see from here now? From here we see a path. Okay, that's actually working pretty well, that we see a path up there. I think it's working well. So it makes us, it kind of makes us like think, okay, now I'm going to go down this way and find that. Like once the player stands here, they have a sense of, we've afforded them a lot of visual information. They can kind of tell looking from here that probably somewhere this maze here leads them back to this. In fact, we could even do more denial here if we want. We could do something like, Oh, let's see. How can we do this? Oh, I could just delete these. That's kind of interesting. I think that's kind of interesting. Eh. Let's make this. What did I do this last time? I don't know. Yeah, that kind of works. Like here we've like from here we do a bit of a trickery where like we seem to be affording them a way up. Um, we could block more. This depends how much information we want to give the player. We could even like block more stuff like this. Maybe you don't want them to see all that. You could even do that, where you can see that much. That's actually kind of more interesting. Like now you can see the lines kind of starting to lead over toward this, and then you go down, and then you're denied the path, but then we deny you this, but then we afford you this other path over here. And then we could make it more interesting too. Like we do a risk versus reward type thing where I don't know. Well, I guess the only real reward here would be to know that you're moving forward. Not sure what a good jump space is here. Maybe 3. Whoa. Maybe that's enough. I don't know. Yeah, but then maybe we also try to convey that there's another path here. This is kind of a not very nice thing to do, I guess, to the player, but maybe there's another path which literally takes them around the backside. Yeah, that might be kind of annoying for the player, but to find that, but I'm trying to think how this could work. This could work if my walls are getting a little weird. Yeah, I guess this could be a risk reward moment where the player sees this. Oops, E, really? Okay. Yeah, okay, so we could do, yeah, we could do the coin carrot here. I guess that could work. Hmm. A lot of overlapping here, but it's okay. So this could be kind of interesting because, yeah, we see like, yeah, this could work. Okay. Just finish this part here. Getting sloppy as I go, but okay, so yeah, so here we have this and we see the coin and then the player goes here and they pretty quickly get a sense of this could be an easier way to get up to the tower. We could even convey it like if the player remembers there was an elevated path to the tower, we could even try to convey that a little more like at a glance. By that I mean we could decide that we want this to be the elevation to clearly start here, the elevated path. And maybe instead now this path becomes like elevated like all the way to the end. So that now when they come this way, you know, they see that, they see the coin, but then here they see like, oh, this goes up. Okay, up's good. We keep teaching the player that up is a good thing, then they could decide like, do I want the goodness of up or do I want, you know, or do I want the coin? maybe we decide they need more incentives, so we put 2 coins. Yeah. So that's just that's yeah, I think that could all work the way we have it now. So Ryan, you had another question? Okay, yeah, this might be a vague and complicated question, but I've had trouble with the blank page problem. Even when theme and some design constraints are locked in, Old West, open world, non-linear, I find staring at my blank notepad for ages. One thing I've noticed between some of your Q&A and from Amelia's lectures is you often start with a small corner, then stretch out. To use the technique in your professional levels, I can see the benefit focusing just on the gameplay and composition of just a very small space. Then let the level build out from that naturally rather than trying to visualize the whole all at once. Interesting. I guess I didn't realize I do that. I start off in a corner. If I do, that's not what I hope to stress on you guys. The thing that I like to think about, like for instance, I built this one from a small corner. But in my mind, the one thing I knew I wanted to do before I started, I guess maybe I should have said that beforehand, but the one thing I did want to try to do was I did want to try to convey an overarching principle, which was this balance of affordance versus denial. The way, like on a large sense in the level, like when I zoom out, I did want to have a level where there was like what looked like a maze, but I wanted to have a lot of high vantage points where you sort of almost like go underwater, so to speak, with very little knowledge of what was going on when you went down into the maze. But I wanted to bring the player up on regular bases. That's why, like on the blockout phase, you see me like doing stuff like I don't know what's going to be all through there. I didn't know. All I knew initially that I wanted to build was the beginnings of a maze and an upper platform where I could see from, and an affordance denial right here with this first coin. But from there, I tried to stay kind of high level. That's what I try to tell you guys, like work really big with simple shapes to try to convey the kind of space you want the player to move through and the overarching experience you want them to have. Like this I kept because I knew I wanted to have that affordance of visual information when their player reaches a tower height. That's why I kept like suddenly putting towers throughout the level like this. And then, later I'll go on and I'll build out more interesting ideas as they come to me. As I build this sort of connective tissue of maze spaces between the towers, then I'll just come up with ideas for new ways of doing affordance and denial. I think in some of these lectures, oftentimes I'm trying to illustrate like maybe some simple gameplay principles. So usually I start building out little examples of those because that's the main point I want to get across. I'm usually trying to address sort of the high frequency issues that I saw arise like after reviewing a lot of the homework assignments either from this semester or across the different semesters I've helped teach the course. Yeah, so that's kind of the reason I do that. But with the blank page thing, the first step, I guess what I should say is the first step for me is photo reference. Like almost always, like just do Google image searches, do Pinterest searches. If you do know what's locked in mentally, like if you know what the thematic direction is, the conceptual direction of the space is already locked in, maybe by a director or leads or whoever, or yourself, because maybe you painted yourself into that corner and that's not necessarily bad. Maybe it's a good corner. You just start looking at photo references and you start using those basic ideas that you see to kind of riff on them. Yeah, so like I think it was like in Ryan's assignment, I saw there was some elements of like kind of more of the sort of Old West sort of feeling in the US, that kind of look. It had structures that look like they'd be built in the Old West, maybe out of Adobe or in Mexico or something like that. So you start looking at photographs of that kind of stuff, and then it gives you ideas as you're looking. Like not only are you you're able to start, when you start building, you're able to start building your space according to the photo reference. But you're also getting ideas about, you know, you might see, for instance, back in the ruins, a few weeks ago we worked on the assignment that was based in the ruins. I feel like you could already see, like, say you didn't know you wanted combat in the space. Maybe you had the freedom to even decide that. So you start looking at ancient ruins, and you know, you start seeing all these pictures, and then you see. Let me go back to the ruins at Laodicea. I think this is the one. The website. I'm gonna go to this website really quick here, because they had a lot of pictures, I remember. Yeah, so you start seeing these pictures. Sorry, I'm going down to the bottom. There's more of them. I know. Yeah, you start seeing pictures through the lens of a level designer. Like you start seeing, like, okay, in ruins is a lot of low low wall structures remaining in really old ruins. And then you start realizing, like, okay, I can use this for a combat space. Like, these are all good. So you know the metrics of your game, and you start saying, um, I know these are good for crouch or full height cover. I can help justify things. In the example I brought up previously in the Homefront game that I worked on a few years back, uh, there was this idea of the plane crash in the suburbs. So um, what remained of the suburbs was very much like this, like just foundational stuff, very low walls. Like you could kind of tell where the house used to be, but most of it was smashed down. But what I suddenly realized, like, it helped inspire me to build the spaces, because I could build a good combat space out of it. I could then decide, like, I could decide on how much destruction I wanted in the house based on how much cover I wanted to provide during a combat scenario. So yeah, I think photo reference is definitely the first thing to start with. I'm working on an area right now which takes place, like, in, I don't know, some kind of a reservoir. I can't get into too much detail. It's some kind of a reservoir. So reservoirs weren't that interesting to me, unfortunately, but it wasn't my call. I didn't make that call. So I looked up pictures of reservoirs, and then it led me to other ideas. Well, actually, let's do. I'm going to go do a Google image search on this one. We'll do reservoir, and I think I saw there was one in Chicago. I happened to read about it because I was looking around. Geez, and it's a restaurant apparently. That's not important. So yeah, there was this. This is the one I saw. There was this a few years back in Chicago. There were a series of reservoirs that were completed. I think they were made out of converted quarries, which was kind of interesting to me. I thought about. I don't want to link a new tab. I want image. Yeah, yeah. I thought this was kind of interesting in the layout. I like this idea of the interesting, like, if we zoom in, you can see, like, there were interesting sort of like terraced walkway structures to go on. There was supposed to be a motorcycle chase that I was doing in this level. So I thought this could be an interesting place to do a motorcycle chase. Like down on the bottom level here, you could see there were like little islands in the bottom of the reservoir with little like paths that were stretched across. So I started thinking about how I could build this out to have an interesting motorcycle chase. And then I don't know how it'll turn out yet. We'll see. This is a good image here. But I saw other things, like there was this neat part where there was a road across the reservoir. Like, it's actually, the highway actually runs across the middle of it. And there's even like right here, it's hard to see. Oof, what happened there? Open image. And, okay, sorry. Yeah, so right here, Yeah, right here there was a, it looks like there's a floodgate built between the two reservoirs for eventually when they're open, they can move water, I guess, from one to the other. I don't really know. Still, even in the other part of the reservoir here, there's all these interesting paths. So, I started thinking about, okay, I could build something that's not this specifically, but I could suddenly take this and like devise paths that are inspired by these kind of areas, and I could create large positive and negative spaces based on where the water pools are, that kind of thing. So that got me thinking about more ideas, which was, okay, how about um, because in games you sort of fudge the reality of things to make them work for gameplay. Um, that's a pretty good image of it there too. There's lots of paths through the middle like that. I started thinking about, okay, if this is kind of like a water project, because water had something to do with this monster that was chasing you on the bike, I thought, what about like water purification? I don't know if you guys have ever seen that. Hopefully this will show me what I want. Yeah, so there were these cool pools like this. I thought were really kind of cool to look at. Is that the one? Not a great image. It's a little fuzzy. I wonder if I can open it in a new tab. Not the best. Okay, finally it loaded up. Yeah, so I thought this was kind of cool here. I thought about, what if by the side of the reservoir there was some kind of water purification plant, and then I saw these interesting structures, these scaffolding structures that went across these water purification what's its. I don't even know what these are. It doesn't matter to me really. We just build it to look essentially in a somewhat believable fashion. There's some really interesting paths here. Like say we extrapolate from this, maybe we extrude these cylinders so they're raised. So you're actually forced to like run around them and then up above them, and maybe we make them wider so a motorcycle can actually drive around them, and maybe the monster jumps out of these pools. I mean, it's suddenly you start with photo reference, and suddenly before you know it, you have like a mess of ideas, and you start thinking about how can I mash these all together, on my blank page, so to speak, right? So yeah, I definitely just collect a nice folder, like save off your images into a folder on your PC, and then when you're done, just tab through them. Really, just tab through them and start just sketching ideas based on all the images. And I feel like the photo reference gets you started. It already removes the blank page scenario from your mind. And a lot of times I bring up this idea. A lot of this kind of mindset works in the creation of movies um, that are just trying to entertain in the classic sense, right? Like Alfred Hitchcock famously, when he was creating the North by Northwest film, he had a bunch of ideas in his head without a story to link them together initially. He just thought these would be fun for moviegoers to see. And he had this idea of a chase at gunpoint over the face of Mount Rushmore. He had the idea of a man getting chased, through a field by a crop dusting plane. Like he just had these crazy ideas that just are really exciting to watch on film, but he didn't know why they would happen. He just thought they were cool. They were fun. They were really entertaining for the audience. So then he talks to his script writer, his writing partner, and he says, I have these ideas, and then I know it has to do basically in some way with a man who is being confused for someone else. But in the course of the movie, I want him taken to all these exotic locations. I want these crazy things to happen to him. And he just had these ideas that came from like not directly related to the original plot, but he just thought, let's find a way to make these work in the movie. And his scriptwriter ultimately did, and now North by Northwest is a classic. And I think that's a really good way to work with level design, especially when there's a certain amount of action gameplay involved. I can't speak to games that are more like strictly narrative focused non-combat games, which these days are mostly in the indie space. But in the kind of games for AAA where you're trying to make like fun set piece gameplay that moves from fun set piece to fun set piece, I would work this way. I find that's probably the best way to work. So I hope that helps. It definitely works for me. Um, sometimes it's hard. It's especially hard if you're really not interested in the original sort of, like you said, the constraints that are kind of locked in. Like for me with this reservoir thing, honestly, I struggled with it for a few days. I think because I had my own ideas about what I wanted to be, but I knew that that ship had sailed and it wasn't going to go that direction, and it was hard for me to shift gears. But when I finally mentally did and got more, I tried to get myself more emotionally invested, because as a creative, as a creator working in the games industry, creation is your, it's your motivation. You want creative fulfillment from it. So inspirational fulfillment. So to that end, I just started plowing through photographs to get my mind like more in the space of what it needed to be. So I hope that helps you. I guess that's about it for me today. I hope this idea of how to use and not use the idea of a maze, I hope that helps you as well. Um, yeah. So if there's no other questions, I'm going to sign off, I guess. Thanks for showing up, guys. Okay. Bye bye for now.